Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of the West Texas Winds from the Archives series. My name is Melissa Graham-Hansen, flutist with the West Texas Winds and principal flute with the Midland-Odessa Symphony and Chorale. I'm so pleased to be here to present this episode to you. We've selected a piece by Jean Françaix, his Quintet number 2, which was written in 1987, a full 40 years after his first quintet. This recording is from a live performance on October 22nd, 2017 in the Ray Greathouse of the Wagner Noel Performing Arts Center here in the Midland-Odessa area of Texas. Performers include Katie Velasquez on flute, Caryn Crutchfield on oboe, Chris Chance on clarinet, Philip Hill on bassoon, and Sonja Millichamp on horn. So now without further ado, I'll turn you over to the active members of the West Texas Winds to discuss this process with you. Chris, Caryn, Philip, and Sonja. I hope you enjoy. Thank you.
Hello. Well, I'm especially happy to present this piece because it's probably my favorite quintet ever, like, period. It's just so cheerful and fun, and it has these endings that surprise and make me laugh, and it just fills me with so much joy. But it's really hard. It's a really hard piece, which for people who know Françaix, it probably goes without saying because his music is always so difficult. But it's really, really fun. So anyway, getting started, the first movement is this super smooth, easygoing prelude that just has this really nice flowing quality to it, where there are little motives getting passed between the instruments, and the oboe sort of floats over it with a melody once it gets started. But it's a short movement. There's not a whole lot to it in terms of length. Does anyone have any additional comments about the first movement?
I always thought it was funny, like it's such a deceptive beginning, like it's like a warm-up, you know. It was just really easy, really chill, and no idea what's coming after that, but yeah.
Yeah, I think the oboe melody at the beginning is so pretty. I loved playing it and just feeling, like you said, just kind of floaty, just floating over all the murmurings underneath it. It's like getting us ready for insanity.
Yeah, this is typical of Françaix, and it's typical of most French music too, especially if it's from this era, early 20th century, mid 20th century. It's kind of like the calm before the storm, and maybe not stormy in the sense of a Beethoven piece that's in a minor key, but stormy in the sense of there's just a lot going on. So the following movements, there will just be way more to the texture. The texture would be more dense. But if we look at the first movement, it's very simple in texture. There's a melody, and there's a bass line that doesn't jump around all over the place like eventually you would hear from the bassoon. And then the middle voices, the rhythm is very, very simple. And it's very beautiful too. It's all the slow French melodies are always so tranquil and peaceful, and I would add there's even a hint of melancholy or like longing when it kind of drifts into a minor key and then it comes back to that major key of G major.
And then there's very little pause between the first two movements. The second movement, the Toccata, just immediately takes off, and it's got pretty much nonstop 16th notes at a quick pace, trading off mostly, I think, between flute and clarinet, but everybody has them at some point. It's just, and this is what I think of the second movement as just the quintessential Françaix. It's got this fun little boop, 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 little happy melody that's going on. It's very, very cheerful and perky. But if you listen to everything else that's happening, there's this constant just machine of this frantic energy that's going on underneath. And the effect is just, you know, it's just this happy little tune, but if you really pay attention to the gears that are turning in there, it's just insane, everything that's happening. It's so fast and it's so hard, but really rewarding, so much fun.
And I almost get out scot-free here because I have a lot of those little melodies that soar above, especially like this movement's 2.5 pages long for me. It's probably longer for you.
Yeah, it's like 4.
That are like big square 13, which is already kind of towards the end of this movement. I just have like half notes and quarter notes, kind of like I did in the first movement. But what he gave me many of is chromatic thirds that were my worst nightmare for a couple months. Because not only are they chromatic thirds, but they're very exposed chromatic thirds. And I would take them over from whoever, or sometimes they'd just be out in the middle of nowhere, like just some chromatic thirds. And other times I was finishing or handing off to somebody else. And I had nightmares about chromatic thirds for a while.
Caryn was very seriously practicing these thirds. I remember going
Yeah.
to rehearsal and they'd be.
Yes. Yeah. And just being able to turn them on when I needed to, instead of like, okay, I can get them if I get 5 shots at it first.
They seem to come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
There's no, if you know the piece, and I've listened to this piece quite a few times before and after we've performed it, and I haven't looked at this specific oboe part, but I've looked at the score a few times, and then all of a sudden it's there. So at least to my ear, maybe to a more experienced, more seasoned ear, you kind of hear it coming somehow. But chromatic thirds is not really, that's not a common scale pattern. So it's hard to, even with the exotic harmony that Françaix uses, it's very hard to prepare the listener's ear for something like that. You kind of just put it in there and say, here it is.
And they're very, very fast, by the way. Just to clarify that, extremely fast.
Yeah.
There, yes. And is this the movement, Chris, where you have a lot of those chromatic thirds too? They pop out of nowhere too, for you.
Yeah, I had a bunch in this one and also in the last movement. But yeah, there was a lot going on in this movement.
There is a lot, and it's just like constant. You're not kidding. It's like perpetual motion. Just this little motor going. It's relentless, but super fun. Super fun.
And one more interesting and I would say rare thing to listen for in the second movement is, so Chris mentioned that the flute and the clarinet are trading off this bubbling, almost chaotic texture underneath the very simple melody. And it's not always flute and clarinet, but it usually is. And that at one point it's flute and bassoon. And they play these 16th notes where it's 2 notes repeated. Da, 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 da. So listen for that toward the end of the movement. That kind of rhythmic support is very common in stringed music. And maybe I would say in piano music too, maybe not exactly in that octave. Maybe they'll give you the octave first and then move to another note and give you the octave. But with the flute and the bassoon in this movement, it's that specific pitch twice, and then it goes to a new note, and then to a new note, and to a new note. I don't think I've ever seen. This is probably the only time I've had to perform something like that, where I'm tonguing the same note just twice, very fast. It's very rare, but it provides a very novel texture, and it just makes Françaix sound like his own. He's his own composer. He doesn't sound like anyone else.
That's the truth.
So in the third movement would be considered the traditional scherzo or waltz in a symphonic piece or a multi-movement piece. And this for sure is a scherzo. This is not joking when he says it's a scherzo. Françaix is a very satirical composer. He's a very facetious composer. He's very sarcastic. And so a scherzo, for those that might not know exactly what a scherzo is, Normally in a symphony written by maybe Haydn or Mozart 200 years ago, that movement would be a waltz. It would be something like a waltz or a minuet. So it's in 3 and it's relatively slow, or it's in a slow 1. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. A scherzo, that term came up when the waltzes started to get really, really fast. So around the time of Beethoven. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So you're feeling the music in 1, but a fast 1. And it's not really something you'd want to dance to because it's just too fast unless you've had maybe 4 cappuccinos. And in this scherzo, not only is it fast, it's also in 5/8 instead of 3/8. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So and different ensembles will take it at slightly different tempos. Although it's normally around that speed, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1. So if you try to dance to it, you're going to have one leg hurting much more than the other pretty soon. And or maybe your partner is going to wonder whether you actually know how to dance or not. And so this one, once again, we have very simple melodies, just 8th notes, dee da da dum, dee da da dum, and what's beneath that is almost what seems to be very random rhythms. Just if you just look at one part, you just look at the horn part, or just look at the bassoon part, it doesn't seem to make any sense. But when you put it all together, it does kind of flow. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And to get another example of that feel, I would recommend Tchaikovsky's 6th Symphony. I think it's is it the 2nd movement, which is in 5?
I believe so.
It's one of the inner movements. I'm pretty sure it's the 2nd movement that's in 5.
Yeah.
And that sounds much more pleasant, more peaceful because it's slower. And it's also Tchaikovsky. It's way more romantic. But like I said, Françaix is not, I wouldn't suggest that Françaix is the most romantic composer. Maybe there's an underlying romanticism there with a large dose of sarcasm in there.
Yes, and I get another nice little dose of some chromatic thirds in this movement too. I'm going to point them out every time because
you worked on them. You might as well.
And also, he does me another little favor here and makes me play high F sharp above the staff at pianissimo. Not nice either. So, but this movement is super fun, and I love the quirkiness and the offbeat being in like a 5/8. I love that kind of quirky feel to this movement.
One thing I want.
One of the things that I think make. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Just I was going to mention, it kind of applies to everything so far. Actually, is the use of the mute with the horn. That's a really big thing in French music. Lots and lots of muted horn, and I think I take my mute out at some point for the first time during the 3rd movement. So that was what struck me really when I listened again. I was like, oh yeah, this was like a muted concert because it was an entirely French program. And that has its own challenges. It makes the intonation a lot more difficult. It's a lot more physically taxing. Low notes are really, really hard with a mute. And I feel like in this piece, I was like, oh, the 2nd movement, I really nailed some of those. And the 3rd movement, not as much maybe, but it's really challenging. But what is great about the mute and quintet is the blend is so good. I can see why they do it. Usually it's a challenge always to play quieter to blend in with the woodwinds. And in this one, like I have to fight for it if I want to be heard. It's kind of the opposite. It really blends in beautifully, like just another woodwind. So that part was cool.
Yeah, I think muted horn is so pretty in this entire piece.
Yeah,
it really adds a different color to just the piece overall.
Yeah, it sounds almost like a different instrument.
Did we cut out? I didn't want to say about the 3rd movement that a lot of times when you hear music that's written in 5/8 or 7/8, a lot of times it can get really beat heavy, and you can really hear that ba 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 ba, and it starts to kind of pound in your ears. But one of the things that Françaix does in the scherzo that's so interesting is that he'll have like half the ensemble will be doing 2 and 3, da 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 da, while the other instruments are going 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2, which makes it even more sort of floaty, and it doesn't ever get that in that just gets to that pounding sense of 1 2 3 4 5, you know, constantly. It never feels like that because we're always sort of doing our own thing in pairs and in groups.
Yeah, I completely hear that. I hear exactly what you're saying there. And I remember it'd be, okay, well, do you have 3 against 2 there or 2 against 3? I was like, oh, well, we're all very independent from each other in many times in this movie. Yeah. Well,
Yes.
if we're ready, I'll go on to the 4th movement, where we introduce even some more color of the English horn. And this movement is titled Andante, and it's just a walking tempo. And if you can just imagine, after all the crazy chaos of the last 2 movements that have been going on, we have this 4th movement that's beautiful, nostalgic. And if you can just imagine like a nice little walk or stroll in Paris. And adding the English horn this far into the program always, besides chromatic thirds, gives me heart palpitations, because I love this piece, but there's a lot of my neuroses that come up because we have a new reed, a new instrument. We've had time, and all of our our reed has dried out by then, and I'm always trying to make this transition from English horn from the oboe into another movement. I'm always trying to make that as seamless as possible, and to not take a lot of time in the middle of a movement to wet my reed or to play a few notes. And it is a little bit nerve-wracking. And so during the 3rd movement, I'm sitting there going, is my reed wet? Is it going to be wet enough? Is it all going to happen okay? Is it going to speak? Because there's always that chance. So I love this 3rd move, or the 4th movement on English horn, but I'm always happy once I get started and go, okay, everything's good. And everything was fine in this performance too. I just have these little neuroses that pop up about switching to English horn without any kind of warm up or preparation. So kind of crazy.
I should add that this 4th movement is actually still in 5. It's still in 5/8. So we imagine, Françaix is using the 5 beat pattern to add that asymmetry, to add that instability, but try to still encourage the musicians through their individual rhythms to let it flow. And this one, the way this movement floats along to me is, one, because it's slower, and then the melody is even smoother from the English horn than it was from the flute and the other instruments in the 3rd movement. But also the accompanying rhythm in the 4th movement is pretty much the same in every measure. It's always 2 and. So that halfway through beat 3. So it's something always happens on beat 2 out of 5 beats. And then we have some sort of offbeat movement in the middle of the measure. And that kind of hypnotic feeling just keeps coming at you every measure. It stops that for a moment about halfway through the movement. There's sort of what would you call it? Maybe an interlude or a bridge. But otherwise, it's kind of that idea, and it kind of just lulls you to sleep almost the same way a slow movement would 200 years before. You have the waltz, and there's 2 inner movements. Between the 2 fast movements, you have those 2 inner movements, one of which is a minuet or a waltz, and then the other one is just the slow sort of ballad-like movement. And back then, they were actually designed to, just to have you rest, and maybe perhaps you would fall asleep. And then to your surprise, you get the waltz or the scherzo even, then that would jostle you awake. And in this piece, he flips it. There's the scherzo first, and then there's the lullaby of the fourth movement.
And that
May
first, whoop.
I love playing English horn. I don't get to do it very often because I'm usually playing principal in the orchestra, and those parts aren't given to me to play English horn, but this is always a special treat. And there's a few different woodwind quintets that we've performed with English horn. And although I also have nightmares about that, I enjoy it once the product is all put together. It's really enjoyable.
And it sounds beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, the fifth movement is a total contrast from the fourth movement. It's marked Allegrissimo, which would be extremely fast. And this goes back to what Chris was talking about that quintessential Françaix mood. It's just light and bubbly and humorous, and it's full of trills and fast notes and just all kinds of things going on. Very, very virtuosic and demanding, but also very lighthearted in spirit. And this is maybe my favorite movement. Every time I listen to this again, I just smile or laugh. I mean, I love it musically. It's so fun to listen to. And then just remembering playing it, just how hard it was. Like, I feel like sometimes in quintet, it gets to a point where it's so hard, it's kind of ridiculous. And I'm not even nervous about it anymore. I'm just like, okay, like I'm going to do some huge leaps. Then I'm going to do some low notes. And then I'm going to do some really fast tonguing and then some trills and then play a melody and just, wow. It just all goes by so fast that it's just kind of fun, like a roller coaster ride. One of my favorite memories of this movement was there's two sections that come up where it's kind of like a hocket thing going on with the horn and the bassoon, which means we're each playing in each other's rests, and it's a leapy passage, and we're alternating back and forth and filling in these things. And it was our first concert together with Philip and our quintet, and it was just such a fun memory playing this really crazy part together. And it's like we get to the first one, and then okay, that was the second one's coming. I just really remember that part. I think I practiced it a ton. I think this is also the only movement where the horn gets some melodies, which is fun. I mean, that's not a complaint. It's all beautiful and fun to play. But there's a couple just real legato lines with all the woodwind stuff going on above it, which is really cool.
I might just point out that I have some chromatic thirds in this movement too. All the way up until the very last measure. Yeah. So like the whole show, I am like stressing about these chromatic thirds because they are all the way to almost the very end. But listening back, I remember when we decided to do this piece and when we okayed it for preview, I was like, I don't know. I don't remember those chromatic thirds going very well, but I'm actually very impressed with my chromatic thirds. Not so that I want to play this again very, very soon. But I enjoyed it, and I thought the whole piece was just phenomenal from everybody.
If we talk about the horn melodies, I think it's a complaint for me, because if you think about the nature of a wind quintet, I mean, the horn is the loudest instrument. So I would think that, well, just give the horn the melody all the time, and then the balance is pretty much set. You don't have to worry so much about this instrument needs to play louder or this one should play softer. And that's a huge reason why I really enjoy Françaix's music, because if you look at the, and not just Françaix's music, there are lots of other wind quintets and other music for woodwinds and horn, where the horn has the melody and the other instruments are just beneath that sound. But if you look at both the Françaix's first and second wind quintet, especially the first one, I mean, the horn has the main theme of the entire piece in the first quintet, like the whole piece. And then in the second quintet, there's many times for me where the horn has the melody and everyone else is just doing something very crazy and frantic underneath that. And I love that texture. I think that's really, really great. And then the hocketing thing between the horn and the bassoon. By the way, that does carry through other instruments. So that section, it starts with the horn and the bassoon, and then it's two other instruments, and then it's two others, and then it's two others, and eventually every instrument has done that performance technique pocketing with the other four instruments at some point. So you listen closely, like maybe listen for the horn and the bassoon together, and then say, okay, now when is it going to be horn and clarinet? And then when is it going to be horn and flute? And then horn and oboe? And they all happen at some point.
Gonna have to study that again. Somehow ours must have been the hardest because that's where I was really laser focused in.
I mean, yeah.
For me, the hardest.
That was definitely the hardest one for me. All those quick triplets were very challenging. And Sonja, again, like you said, this was the first, or one of the first pieces that I performed with this group. This was my first concert with this group. So talk about an initiation process or a pledge process. This piece was definitely like, let's see if you can really handle this.
I think it's always a trial by fire in the West Texas Winds. My first program felt the same way. Yeah. Thank you. Were awesome.
No one gets out. No one gets away from it. I think speaks too to just the overall difficulty of some of the programs that we put together and some of the pieces that we've played. Like for everyone to have that memory, like of a kind of an initiation by fire. Like Woodwind Quintet is not for the light of heart. It is there's some really, really, really challenging music that we've performed during our time together.
It's like, I feel like all the hardest stuff I've ever played has been wind quintet stuff, like no question.
I probably agree with that.
Yeah.
I would agree with that myself. Mm-hmm. Yep. So fun. This was fun to relive this piece with you guys.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for hearing our comments, and please enjoy Françaix Quintet number 2.